What is going on, good people? How you doing? Hopefully this weekend has been amazing for you. I'm sure for those of us who are sport advocates, I'm sure y'all tapped in and probably watching the game or whatever. So if you're taking time out the game to come check in and tap in with us here today, definitely want to say we appreciate you very much. We have an incredible I think something that's happening right now, which is so important for us all to pay attention to, is the magnitude of what it means when you have people who come together to work together to make things happen. And so our guest tonight is someone who is definitely doing that. I'm a part of an incredible task force committee. I just want to say to our guest, Ms. Kamilah Moore, thank you so much for everything that you've been doing. Thank you for your commitment to this struggle, to this critical piece of understanding. I think is the most important element of what we talking about here, because I think for such a long time there's been like a lack of understanding about why it's so significant. But I don't want to jump too far ahead of myself, so we'll say that and come back to it. But without any further ado, thank you so much for being here. So our guest today is Ms. Kamilah Moore. Thank you
Thank
so
you
much
for
for being here.
having me. This is my first time actually going on live. I was trying to.
Really? I think she froze up. Probably getting them good phone calls coming in, but hopefully we'll have her come back. So for those of you who don't know, I would say almost 2 years now, there's been a special task force that's been assigned by our governor to look into the effects of the enslavement of our ancestors, to put together a report for reparations. And our guest, Kamilah Moore, has been someone who has been the chairperson for that committee, and has recently, I think it's maybe 3 days old, has turned in a 500-page document talking about just everything that concerns our being, um, regarding to, for those of us who are direct descendants of enslaved Africans, what does it mean for all the things that we go through, how racism plays a major part in our development leading to now. So like this is probably the strongest piece of, I would say, documents that would support reparations for us. You know what I mean? For those of us who are um, of that descent. Those of us who are, whether we are descendants of free blacks during the time of cattle slavery, for those of us who have a direct lineage that can trace back to, being our ancestors being enslaved. So this is something that's incredible. This is something that is big for us to have something like this on. So hopefully we'll get back on here soon, and we can. There we go. All right, we back at it. We right back on. Well, thank you for allowing us to be the first time that you go live, and I'm sure you have been in very high demand as of late. We've been seeing you all over the place, whether it's CNN, MSNBC, TMZ, everywhere. So Huffington Post, like it doesn't stop. So I know you're a very busy person, but I wanted to first, before we get into talking about reparations, talking about like the importance of local politics, because I think we don't get to having this document that you turned in if there isn't people around within the state that can actually bring this to light. And I know you've worked with some incredible people. There was a Zoom call a while back that you were on. I think that Dr. Shirley Weber was facilitating, and that's
Oh,
my
wow.
mentor. So one of my mentors. I went to San Diego State, majored in Africana Studies when Dr. Weber was the chair of the department, and she's moved on and done some
Yeah.
incredible things since then. But we come from that cloth, and I know that she's been someone that's been involved in this as well. But I want to talk a little bit about like the importance of that, because in LA this upcoming week, we have opportunity to do something with our voting. We got someone that's running for mayor that has a strong opportunity to get that seat. And it's interesting. I think we tend to pay a lot of attention to like national things that are happening, but when it comes to like the local, based around like community things, there's not a lot of attention that's being paid. Maybe we'll get some things in the paper or in the mail about like, this person's running for whatever seat, but that's about it, unless we're like glued in and like watching our local channels. But local politics, I would say, is more important than national politics. I think what happens in DC may eventually trickle down to where I'm at in California, but what's happening for the folks who are running for positions where I'm at, that really matters, So I know you're also on the ballot as well, but can you talk a little bit about how important it is for folks to be involved?
Yes. First, thank you for having me. And to answer your question, it's super, super important to be involved in local politics. And it's so interesting that you bring up this question, because just yesterday, I found a tool online that allows you to track how many people have turned in their ballot. Right? You can't see who they voted for, but it's a tracker to see who's turned in your ballot. And so, I looked for the state Senate districts 28, which includes, Leimert Park, the Crenshaw area, Ladera Heights, View Park, Baldwin Hills, even downtown LA. And the percentage was 10%. It's actually the lowest return rate in the entire state, second to another district. But so, that was alarming to me. But I mean, it speaks to what, we've been hearing in the news, with this election, and often with like gubernatorial elections rather than primary presidential elections. Like the turnout is always low. Voter engagement is typically lower than in the presidential primaries. And then it speaks to like, communities feeling disengaged as well. So that's not necessarily the fault of the voters. It's really the fault of like the politicians. But that's neither here nor there. It's important for us to stay civically engaged. And that's all I could say for that.
Right. No, I think that's something that's really big. And we're talking about 10%. I don't know if we realize like what that means for us as we're voting locally. We're talking about the people that's over our school districts, the folks that's our police chiefs, like the district attorneys, the mayor, all these things that play like a pivotal role into not only my life, but the comfort of my children's life, how they're growing, like all that plays such a significant role. But there seems to be some kind of disconnect. And like you say, we're not here to say whose fault it is, whatever the case may be, but it is something that's very alarming as you talk about. That's that 10%. That's very alarming, especially in critical times that we're in now. It's interesting because it's like, on one hand, these past couple of years, there was a lot of support at first for like, we are against anti-Blackness. We are against systematic racism, and these are the things that we're going to do. And we slowly but surely start to see things die down from that. Even to the point, like for me, like I watch, sports. I watch college basketball a lot. And there was only one team that played in the tournament this year that had the Black Lives Matter shirt. And that coach happened to be a Black person who said, we fought to wear these shirts in a tournament. They didn't want us to wear these shirts in the tournament, but we did anyway because we still feel like there's need to be more attention that's brought up to like what's going on out here. And I thought that was very powerful. So it's like we start to see things kind of shift back to like a sense of normalcy, whatever that means. But at the same time, what tends to happen is like there's a lack of support, which means that there's a lack of involvement. So we get numbers like 10%, as far as like turnout rates and voting, and that's critical. But that leads me to where we're at now. So despite this, despite this turnout, you and the folks that's been on your committee took this mission to heart and came back with, I think, one of the most powerful indoctrinations that we had as far as support for reparations. And that word, when it comes to from us, when it comes to our community, it's something that's like just kind of been floating in the atmosphere for a very long time. At one point, it's like you had to be in certain communities to even talk about it. Then it got okay. You start to hear folks talk about a little bit more. And so, but now we're here, we're like this at the forefront. We have actual bills, you know, on the table now. But now, along with that, there is this massive report that you've done so eloquently. That's over 500 pages. I'm not going to act like I read everything, because I didn't. But I definitely took a look at what were some of the summary markups of like what were the critical points, and I do want to take the time to like go through it. It's just going to take me more than a couple of days to get through that. But it was so powerful. Can you talk a little bit about like that experience, and why do you feel it's so important to bring the things that y'all talked about in this report? Because it's not just like because slavery happened, right? No, it's like from this period on to where we are now, there has been significant things that can be traced directly back to this time period that has affected African Americans. And here are those things. Like, tell me a little bit why that was so important for y'all to put that together.
Absolutely. And so, to your point earlier, this task force was a result of, you know, Secretary of State Shirley Weber, when she was in the Assembly. You know, she championed this bill alongside grassroots organizers from Los Angeles. And, you know, she shepherded bipartisan support for this bill. And so this task force literally would not exist without Secretary Weber. I think that needs to be made very clear for the historical record. But yes, so this 500-page report actually is, you know, a culmination of a year's worth of work, where we started actually last June. And we started to have, you know, substantive virtual public hearings on a variety of topics, chronologically starting with, you know, the first atrocity against, you know, the African American community, that being the transatlantic slave trade. We had hearings, you know, on that. We had hearings on the institution of slavery and the Great Migrations and the impetus for the Great Migrations. And more often than not, it was because, you know, our ancestors were fleeing racial terror from the South. And so we had people to provide personal and expert witness testimony on those topics. For instance, you had Poet Laureate Amanda Gorman, her grandmother, testified and gave personal witness to the task force about her journey of, you know, coming from the South to California, yet still facing anti-Black racism in California. So we had, you know, continued to have our virtual public hearings, starting with the slave trade, to the institution of slavery, to the Great Migration, to genocidal Jim Crow and the policies that define that era, including in California, and then to more contemporary harms against the African American community, making like a direct line, like as you said, connecting all those atrocities to the transatlantic slave trade, the institution of slavery, and then showing how the claim for reparations is based on those particular atrocities and how the harms that derive from it are all interconnected. And so this report is a 500-page labor of love from the California DOJ, Civil Rights Division, and the 9-member task force. And again, like I said, it just substantiates the clear claim, what the African American community always says: we don't need a study, we know what happened to us. But this report is just a way to show, look, the evidence is overwhelming, and it's supposed to build up for our final report that's going to be released next July, which will contain our comprehensive plan for reparations. So,
wow, that's very powerful, and I think that's something to like. So not only was there follow through from the initial, you know, hey, let's bring some folks together, let's study this. Let's see what we can bring to light. But then we come with this report. So there's massive follow through from there. And there's another half to this as well. As you just mentioned about like planning things out and looking towards like, what does that even look? So what does reparations look like? I think that's the other thing too, that like, I mean, we hear, you know, we hear all the time, we hear all the jokes in the world, right? You know, I think I can't help but to think back to the end of the first Barbershop with Cedric's entertainer character, you know, at the shop, when he was like, what reparations going to do for Black folks? That's just going to make Cadillac the #1 car dealer in America, you know. And so it's always been this kind of like joking, you know, myth, like this is not really something that's ever going to happen. So like, in order for me to cope with this, I'm just going to poke fun at it, you know? And I think that has a lot to do with like how we've been able to like exist throughout this time period. You know, I don't think it's a coincidence that the world's best comedians happen to be Black. I think it's because of how we cope with what has happened. You know what I mean? That's one coping mechanism. And I even appreciate the part of the report where y'all talk about like this significant, like how this has affected us culturally. What has this taken us? You know, that's powerful. That's beyond of like, you know, what we tend to think about this more, but also this our day-to-day coping mechanisms. How do we are able to exist and, you know, and try to build on something? I think that's something that's so big on the report that y'all put together. And I'm
to your
sure,
point, you know, I love chapter 9, which is, you know, the control of African American cultural and intellectual life. And like you said, what's so powerful about that chapter is that, you know, it delineates, you know, the harms against the African American community in terms of, you know, intellectual property theft, in terms of like our Black musicians being culturally appropriated and all that, right? But what is powerful about it in that chapter, you see how, you know, extensive, you know, the contributions the African American community has had, not only on the state of California, but this nation, despite of the ongoing oppression and degradation that our community experiences. I think that really shines in that particular chapter.
Absolutely. And I think this goes more to like why it's so important to like take pride in being an American. As a people, I think there's no one more patriotic than Black folks in this country. This due to what you just said, despite the treatment of everything that we've gone through, like every single war we've been a part of. The first soldier to die for this country has been a Black soldier. You know, like every single step of progression that we've been there. But that speaks so powerful. So here's something else that I'm very concerned about, you know, just speaking, you know, this report comes out and it's so rich of a lot of information, and people see that it's 500 pages. And I'm talking about folk, you know, everyday folk. And it's like, it's 500 pages. Like, I don't have time to read 500 pages. And so it's like, how do we, you know, and I think this is more on like us, because I feel like, so there's a shift where, or something has to happen to where like folks like yourself, y'all did this labor, y'all put in this labor. But now it's like people like me, I feel like need to help with like this piece. We need to talk about this the way we talking about how Will Smith slapped Chris Rock at the Grammys. You know what I mean? We need to talk about this the same way how everyone's talking about how surprised they were that Kevin Samuels all of a sudden passed away. We need to talk about this, and this needs to be a part of the day-to-day conversations in that same regard. How we upset that we couldn't get these past Jordans on the Nike sneaker app. We need to talk about this in the same regards. You know, it needs to be a part of like our day-to-day conversation. And so I feel like there has to be something that we can do as just like public folk to bring that to the masses, to kind of have those conversations. I want to, you know, hear your thoughts about that too. Like, what's the part that you feel that folks like myself, you know, who are, you know, just everyday people, like how can we help play a role in like making sure that this conversation continues to go? Because I saw that press conference, you know, I think a lot of us saw that White House press conference, you know, like the stance, you know, we haven't had time. The president still has the same stance that he had. Why? How can you look at this document and it still have the, you know, the same? But again, I don't want to digress. So I would love to hear your thoughts.
Well, yeah, to that point, like, you know, how can you have the same stance, but also what is your stance? Like, that's still kind of unclear. But you know, what could people do? And this is something that I have been thinking about, and I've been excited about just the response that the report has been getting, like on social media. You know, I'll just look on Twitter and people are like, oh, I can't wait to, you know, read this with my friends or read this with my family or my professional networks. Like, I'm even starting to see some like leaders of educational institutions saying they're going to incorporate this into their syllabus, which is super, you know, cool to see. And so, you know, I think to the extent that people can do that, like, read the report in groups, maybe like a chapter a week or something like that. But, it's also
Right. No,
book
for real.
clubs.
Book clubs. We got book clubs throughout. Like, this could be something that we are discussing every week. We're people are in charge of certain chapters, and so what did you get from this chapter? Okay, now y'all are
Yeah.
charged with this next. Like, yes,
And,
I'm with
it's
it. I'm with all
also
of you.
part of the responsibility of the task force because, yes, we do have this report and, it's great for people to take the lead, but we're also keeping in mind and thinking about onboarding like a communications consultant just to really break down the findings and to help further educate California about what we found. So that's also in the pipeline as well.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm happy to hear that because I feel that there is much work that needs to be done around this, and of course, y'all carry a chunk of that load, but there's other things too that I feel that the community can carry as well. So to hear that there are educators who are saying they're going to add this to the syllabus is great. That's something I was speaking about too. Like, who can I contact to make sure that this is a part of the syllabus for for next year? Because I'm fortunate to work in higher education and know a lot of great people throughout the state of California that's doing big things in higher education for our CSU system as well as our UC system. So, but I really feel like there needs to be a role that we can play. So to hear like what are some of the thoughts about that is powerful. And I think my last question that I will ask you before I don't want to take up too much of your time, but my last question will be: so California has always, I feel like, been a state that's somewhat been ahead of the curve. What happens in our state tends to like trickle and it eventually get to the rest of the nation. What do you feel that this report will do for the national conversation about reparations? We're focused on California now, but eventually this is going to become a national conversation. What do you feel that this report has done or will do to bring this more of
Yeah,
a
that's a
national
great question.
conversation?
And at the top of our conversation, I mentioned how, Secretary of State Shirley Weber, when she was an assembly member, worked alongside, grassroots organizers for this task force. And I just wanted to mention, for instance, Marcus Champion. He was one of those grassroots organizers who actually wrote into the bill language that pretty much stated in layman's terms that, even when Black Californians get reparations, that does not preempt the federal government. That does not, leave the federal government off the hook, so to speak. So, Black Californians would be eligible for reparations on the state level and a federal level. So that was just a signal in AB 3121, which is this task force scopes and powers are predicated on. That was a signal written into a bill by a grassroots organizer with the intention in mind that reparations is first and foremost a federal responsibility. And
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
in the
absolutely.
preliminary recommendations
Absolutely.
in the report, there's actually a preliminary recommendation to transmit this actual 500-page report to the Biden administration and to create a reparations commission, particularly and specifically for African Americans or American freedmen. So that's the intention. We have that baked into the report. A signal to the federal government that this is primarily your responsibility, and action, preferably by executive action, is necessary.
Oh yes, yes, I love it. I love to hear it. Because again, it's incredible when you really think about it. What happened to majority of all of our ancestors. To what it even took for our ancestors to land on those shores of Virginia, of Texas, of the Carolinas. Like just the journey within itself to get to that particular part, is something that no other, I feel, human race, if you will, has ever endured. Just that
Yes.
particular journey within itself. So then you add on everything else that comes on top of that. And for the fact that we have folks like you that's here, bringing this to the attention that we still have us walking around able-minded body and able to deal with things that we deal with on a daily basis is truly remarkable. And I think this report helps bring that to the forefront. I think it gives language to what we have been feeling, but haven't had the language to kind of explain like how we've been feeling, or just the energy. Like listen, I don't have the time to tell you. I think that was the biggest thing. Throughout this time of since the summer of George Floyd, we've had a lot of so-called allyship, like, hey, can you tell us what we can do? And it's like, no, I can't. I'm tired. I can't tell you what to do. Like, you got to figure it out yourself. So this report gives language to all of that, which I think is another thing.
And one last thing, and it's so interesting that you brought up George Floyd, may God rest his soul, because this 500-page report is actually the first and most extensive report on the atrocities against the African-American community since the Kerner Commission on Civil Unrest in 1968. That was a commission that was commissioned by President Lyndon B. Johnson, after, race riots due to the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. And, what's interesting about that is not much has changed since 1968, right? We've had many different people in our community be assassinated by the police, terrorized by the police. George Floyd in 2020 being the most, I guess, notable, for a lack of better words. And since 2020, people have kind of gone back inside and kind of forgot, like, we're still dealing with the genocide here. So I think that this report is so timely, and I hope that it kind of recalibrates people to focus on what's really important in unfinished business, which is reparations for the American freedmen community.
Yes, and if I can add one more thing to that, I think sometimes when we talk about justice or justice reform, and then someone to throw in like reparations, we tend to think of it as like it means two separate things, when it's like, no, that's an alignment. Those things need to happen. Like, both of that need to happen. It's not either or, it's all of it. This is all a part of when we talk about justice for something. This is what that means. So again, I think the language, I think how the report came out helps us all give more language to why those things intersect and why they are together, why they go hand in hand. So thank you. And I don't know if I ever have a chance to thank the other folks that's on the committee, but you tell them that I said thank you for everything that they put into it. We definitely can reach out to Dr. Weber and tell her the same thing. But yeah, this is incredible. And, we wanted to make sure that we had you on to just give you flowers and say thank you so much for your work that you do. I think, we tend to have a certain perspective on our politicians. And I think until we understand the work that goes into what real ones do, like yourself, then we can start looking at our politicians more on a positive side and seeing how we can also help, bring this all together. Because the work that you do, it's not going to move if we're not moving with you. And I think that's something that we need to do more of as a community, is help move.
That's so true. Forward. And thank you again for the time. Shout out to my cousin Anthony for the connect.
Yeah, shout out to Chef Anthony.
But for people who want to learn more, you can visit our website, oag.ca.gov/AP3121. You'll find our report there. You can also email the task force at reparationstaskforce@doj.ca.gov. And you can find me on Twitter at Kamilah V as in Victoria Moore. So Kamilah V Moore. Thank you.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time. Enjoy the rest of your week, and hopefully we'll be in
sounds good.
Soon.
You enjoy the rest of your Sunday and week. Bye.
All right. Yes, thank you. Thank you. Take care. There it is, folks. So again, that was Kamilah V Moore, chairwoman for the task of reparations in California. If you haven't had a chance to look into this report, I try not to tell people what they need to do. It's not my job to be on here and like preaching to people. But I think it is within the community's best interest to understand this report. Like I said, I haven't got through gotten through all 500 pages of that report. I've looked at the summary of the different chapters as of so far, but that's something I definitely want to dive deep into, and I think it's so important for us to do it because it's time. It's long overdue for us to start looking into restorative justice when it comes to the worst thing, the worst thing that could ever happen to a people has happened to our people. And since 1916, we have just been coping with it. There hasn't been anything set in place that helps us deal with it. We've just been personally walking around here coping with it. And, thank God, for who we are as a people, to be able to deal with it, to be able to still walk around and be productive citizens and, and be incredible parents and find love and in all these things, because what happened was so horrific that we were not supposed to. So, yeah, it's time for us to start talking about this in great depth, and getting more serious about how we can help. What is our role as people? How we can help, push this needle forward. So, it's important for us to get behind it. So, one more time, again, shout out to Kamilah V Moore. Shout out to Dr. Shirley Weber. And everyone else that has worked on getting this bill. She mentioned a few different times that there's been a lot of grassroots community organizers and community folks and organizations that have played a role into making this bill what it is today too. We definitely have to continue that work. This is how things move together, is when we have every component working together. It's like kind of like a football team. Tom Brady is nothing without his offensive linemen. Right, the wide receivers that Brady is throwing the ball to is nothing without that Tom Brady throwing the ball to them, so on and so forth. It goes down the line, and so that's how we gotta move. We have to continue to move like that, or start to understand like the importance of us moving together as a community. So again, y'all have a good night. I'm sure y'all either having dinner or watching the game, whatever the case may be. But again, it's work to be done within the community. And so hopefully we want to take this chance to do that work. All right. Y'all have a good one. Until next time. Peace.